you're aware, we are just using this general space as kind of the meeting platform that we're streaming from. So if you're okay with staying in here and showing up, that's fine. But just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. So, all right. Well, I'll give it just a second for the meeting to pop up on there. And then... All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Apologies for the slight delay there. We were just making sure we've got all of our esteemed guests on with us today. Introducing in the top right above me, is Senator Lisa Grafstein from Wake County. To her left, we have senior policy advocate. Is that fair, or just policy advocate? For education over at the NC Justice Center, Sarah Montgomery. And then in our bottom left here, we have Senator Mujtaba Mohammed over in Mecklenburg County. Very excited to have each of these individuals on tonight so we can kind of discuss some of the education bills, as well as some of the general anti-LGBTQ rhetoric and legislation we're seeing, not just here in North Carolina, but also across the entire country as well. Just to, I guess, quickly give each of you a brief moment to introduce yourself and kind of maybe explain your involvement with the General Assembly, or kind of where you're standing in education or LGBTQ issues. Kick it off over to Sarah first.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm Sarah Montgomery. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Senior Policy Advocate at the North Carolina Justice Center's Education and Law Project. I'm also the proud co-chair of Every Child NC. We are a statewide community-led coalition leading the fight for equitable school funding, and we use our longstanding Leandro case as a way to organize in our community and bring more people into this advocacy. So great to be here with everyone tonight.
All right, thank you so much. And then Senator Grafstein.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Hey, I'm Lisa Grafstein. I represent Senate District 13, which is a piece of Raleigh, sort of the North Raleigh area. I've been in the North Carolina Senate for approximately 53 days now, and it's every bit what you've heard. My background prior to being in the legislature is that I have been and am a civil rights attorney in a lot of different areas, including workers' rights, and most recently in the last 11 years in the disability civil rights area. My connection, as I took a survey, and it turns out that I am the only LGBTQ member of the North Carolina Senate. So I guess that qualifies me to be here today. Good to be with you.
Just a feather in the cap, really, which we certainly appreciate that representation there. And then over to Senator Mohammed.
Thank you so much, Tyler. It's great to be with the LGBTQ Democrats of North Carolina. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for these wonderful guests for taking the time to join me on this panel, and thank you for everyone who helped organize. Mujtaba Mohammed, proudly serving the people of Mecklenburg County's 38th State Senate District in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm currently serving my third term in the North Carolina Senate. I've been a lifelong public interest attorney serving the North Carolina General Assembly, and I'm proud to be standing in the gap for so many of our most vulnerable North Carolinians. Honored to have always been a longtime ally of the LGBTQ plus community, whether it's the committee room, whether it's the floor of the North Carolina Senate, or our greater community. I think we need a North Carolina that works for everyone, and that obviously includes our most vulnerable folks, and of course those that have been illegitimately targeted time and time again and demonized, and that is our LGBTQ community. So our heart goes out to you, and I'm always going to be in your corner and proud to support each and every one of you listening in.
Thank you so much. We certainly appreciate all the support that each of you provide, not just in education or the LGBTQ spaces or in Raleigh, but also your local communities as well. AOC is over in Japan and just kind of gave a update on some of the LGBTQ rights they're facing over there in terms of inequalities. Although South Korea just recently implemented some same-sex marriage protections over there. I think everybody on this call and probably watching here knows that the fight for LGBTQ equality is a long and arduous one for sure. Here at home we've got SB 49, which is being dubbed the North Carolina version of the Don't Say Gay bill, modeled very much after what we saw in Ron DeSantis's Florida. We are also seeing specific anti-trans legislation across the entire country. Just recently over in, I believe it was Arkansas, we saw a ban on gender-affirming care for individuals under the age of 18. There was a reporter who asked a student, who had transitioned during that time, why is this affecting trans youth specifically? Why is that 14-year age limit so important? She's like, well, I wouldn't have made it to 18 if I'm at 14 at that point. So, these are very serious issues. We are going to take a look at some of the bills. I've got them to pull up and kind of review some of the specific texts that we're a little concerned about. But just wanted to kick off and kind of let anybody, I guess, give a general state of things in the General Assembly as far as LGBTQ and education discussions. And just kind of give us a brief wrap up of where we stand at the moment with things here in North Carolina. So Sarah or Senator Grafstein?
Yeah, I'm happy to start off. I think Sarah probably has a more comprehensive sort of state of the state in terms of education. In terms of the state of things in the General Assembly, I guess I'll start with Senate Bill 49 because that's the one that has come through the Senate. And so for those who kind of don't know the intricate process, which I certainly did not before 52 days ago, there are a lot of places that a bill goes before it gets passed. So the Senate Bill 49 passed through 3 different committees on the Senate side, and then is also passed through the chamber. It was voted on along party lines and passed. So I guess what I would like to kind of highlight is that during the course of those 3 hearings in the 3 different committees, there's opportunity for public comment. We just heard testimony after testimony after testimony from people about themselves, about their family members. We heard from social workers and psychologists. We heard from professionals and just community members who have concerns. And it was a really clear theme that ran through those statements. Just to touch briefly, Tyler, you certainly welcome me to look through the text specifically if you'd like to later. But just generally speaking, the issues with Senate Bill 49 were really kind of a couple. It was actually kind of a long bill, and it was called the Parents' Bill of Rights. But most of it was just a restatement of things that are already true in terms of parents' rights, and then sort of like smushed in a couple little places were very specific provisions that were the real issue. One was sort of an outing provision that would require schools to tell parents if their child asked to use different pronouns at school or asked to go by a different name. And so it obviously is just a means of requiring schools to tattle, essentially. And then the other provision was one that again, couched very sort of subtly about references to sexuality and gender and things like that within certain grade limits, but really is meant to sort of erase the existence of LGBTQ people in the context of education. So those were the things that were really concerning, and just the targeting. So one thing I will say kind of about the state of things generally that I'd like us to kind of come back to and talk about at some point, if not today, at some point in the future, is that this really is a scapegoating kind of thing, right? Like, do you all know that the tax rate for corporations is going down to 0 in 2030? That's bad, but nobody's talking about that because the issues that are brought up that are kind of get the news, that get the attention, are really these. I don't want to say distraction issues because they really do relate very specifically to people's lives, but they're the things that make it possible for things to happen behind the scenes as well. So it's sort of a dual thing that's happening. You have those of us being sort of demonized and marginalized, and children being harmed, and at the same time, no attention being paid to the things that are doing other kinds of harm in education. And this is more sort of Sarah's lane, I think, but we're underfunding our education because we're cutting our taxes. So these things kind of all fit together, and I just want to highlight that because I think it's important that we keep an eye on what the big picture is here, really, for our kids and for their education.
Absolutely. I did just want to pull up the bill real quick just to kind of highlight on those, specific matters, because again, it's not as though Democrats, are against parents being involved with, their child's education. I don't think that's anything that anybody is saying in the General Assembly. I did find it interesting that whenever I was presented with information from Senator Perry specifically about the feedback he's hearing from, his survey indicated that, they want LGBTQ curriculum out of schools, yet whenever it asked whether or not they were a parent, only 1/3 of the respondents at that point, were even parents, providing feedback on this. One of the other questions that they had asked, though, was whether or not it was a household that had a gun in it or not. So it's very targeted and very interested how, LGBTQ discrimination is linked to individuals that have guns in their home. And as we'll discuss later with Senator Mohammed, in terms of the recent pistol permit bill that was just passed through, that is certainly, discouraging and very concerning for LGBTQ people in the state specifically. Moving over to the bill real quick, I don't think our panelists can see this right here at the moment, unfortunately, unless you're looking at the actual stream right now, but I did just want to take note of that medical exemption, or I guess medical/mental health notification that goes to parents. Where was that? Apologies here. So prior to or contemporaneous with changes, notice of changes in services or monitoring related to a child's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being, and the school's ability to provide a safe and supportive learning environment to that child. And then right beneath that is kind of the real, tricky part here. Prior to any changes in the name or pronoun used for a student in school records or by school personnel, notice to the parent should be made. I guess I've got a general question as somebody whose first name is Jonathan. Do we know for sure if that's going to require a specific request to parents in terms of name changes? Same thing for, I guess, other nicknames. Like, how far are we, looking at potentially stretching this with this kind of language here? Is that really what we're concerned about from the LGBTQ protection side of things, specifically with, the book banning and reporting of curriculum and materials, as we're seeing both not only in Florida with empty library bookshelves, but again, here in New Hanover as well, we've got a list of LGBTQ books that are kind of on the chopping block at this point. So for that language specifically, kind of what's the extent of concern that LGBTQ families, students, teachers have in terms of kind of navigating those subjects and topics? And open it up to the floor there.
You're muted.
You make a good point, that the language does seem to be pretty broad, right? That any type of, I want to go by middle name now, would be reportable. I think that's a great, and I'm confident, unintended point.
Tyler, real quick, what I would say from my perspective as a parent of children in elementary school, first of all, let me tell you, we are very much intricately involved in the lives of our children at school. There is nothing preventing in our current system any parent to be intricately involved in their child's education. In fact, I encourage folks to get involved in your child's education. It's critical because we far too often expect too much from our educators. They're stretched thin. We already know about teacher shortages and so many things. These are just unnecessary burdens. I believe fundamentally this is another far-right conservative agenda to further pit our educators against our parents, further demonize and treat public schools poorly in order to move towards that privatization of our education system. That's what's happening here. As someone that has represented young children as a public interest attorney, I can tell you there are parents out there that need a lot of support and assistance, and we need to provide wraparound services around them. I have represented young children who do identify themselves as LGBTQ+, and for certain reasons had to potentially not share those things with their parents because of abuse and neglect. And the reality is, oftentimes we do reach out for help as human beings. Adults can reach out to help to their friends, their neighbors, maybe their coworkers, because they might not be able to talk about something that they're struggling with at home or with their loved ones. So children and young people are no different. And to be able to limit that access to that type of support system that so many of our kids so desperately need, especially acknowledging and understanding that not every single child comes from a privileged background. Not every single child necessarily has that two-parent household. So we've got to, unfortunately, rely on our social workers, rely on our educators. And thankfully, we're so thankful that we have so many great public school educators and administrators and guidance counselors and social workers who are willing to wrap their arms around these kids and be able to provide those services and supports to them when they so desperately need that. And it's sad that the Republican legislature decided, as soon as we got back into session in this biennium, to essentially pull bills out of the trash can that Governor Cooper had vetoed. And we're here because of politics, simply political seats being lost and gained. It was what has brought us here every single week, with these bills being brought up time and time again to override the governor's veto. It's purely political. It has nothing to do with public education. It has nothing to do with making sure that our children are prepared for a global economy. And it has nothing to do with actually supporting our parents and our educators in the long run.
Absolutely. I did want to, again, kind of talk about some of the burden that's being put on our school staff, specifically in our school systems. I'm going to pull the bill back up, and if you are watching right now live, you should be able to find that bill in the info section right beneath. You might have to click for more info, but you can pull that bill up yourself and follow along if you'd like. Over in 115C, subsection 76.16, we've got notifications of student physical and mental health. Again, prior to any changes in the name of in the name or pronoun used for a student, this information has to be sent on over. The interesting part that I think this leads into is, I've classified as kind of creating a culture of fear for students. I know for me specifically, whenever I was growing up, like I had a father in, the household who was a teacher who I went to school with all the time. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I was like super comfortable with, having those type of conversations with him, because, I mean, that's just, the reality of the situation at that point. So to not have any, quote unquote, safe space at school, because everyone knew my father. I mean, he was the soccer coach of the high school team for, almost a decade. And, I mean, everyone knew him as the person to go and talk to for like, difficult student situations. He's a really loved math teacher and stuff. But that also like entrapped me into, okay, well, if everyone can go and talk to him, then like, who do I have to talk to, both at school or at home? So whenever we have this reporting mechanism here in the bill that demands teachers or counselors or school staff, to report this information over, I think this language has been added recently from what I could tell, but it states, where was that? School personnel shall do one or both of the following. Option 1, encourage a child to discuss issues related to the child's well-being with his or her parent. Option 2, facilitate the discussion of the issue with the child's parents. It notates a little bit further a possible exception. There's like a court order or something like that involved. But another, again, interesting worded sentence here is, when a reasonably prudent person would believe that disclosure would result in the child becoming an abused juvenile or neglected juvenile. So I guess my question is, like, where does that, again, stop for legal purposes? Where does reasonably prudent come into play with that, considering, we've got all of these LGBTQ families and students, coming out in support or against this and claiming that it is going to be harmful. I guess what are some, looking at potential strategies for, queer families to kind of stay protected and maybe find better protections for students as well through that avenue?
And Sarah, I don't want to cut you off. You were going to jump in, but I think the key word you said there, Tyler, was fear. And it kind of, in some ways, there's an echo here with some of the discussions around abortion bans, because what happens is exactly what you're talking about. you have these new rules. A lot of them are kind of vague. It's hard to know what they mean, right? One is that person's life in danger from childbirth. What's a reasonably prudent possibility? And I think that the part you're talking about, what a reasonably prudent person wouldn't disclose, I think that's actually just medical records. I don't think the same exception applies just in general about disclosing pronouns. But it really, what you would be tending to do if you're a teacher or a provider who's been told this information is you're going to take the safe route, right? You're going to do the thing that's going to least likely result in you losing your job. And everybody understands the pressures now that are on school systems, that are on teachers, that, if you don't disclose and it turns out later that you knew that you're going to lose your, like, people understand those kinds of concepts. It is about creating fear. And part of creating fear is about control. And going back to sort of what Senator Mohammed was saying earlier, and the tie-in, I think, that you were referring to with all these bills, whether it's the gun bills and other things, is there's real, I think, reactionary kind of element that runs through all these things, which is a grasping onto things that are from the quote unquote better days, right? Like, things used to be simple. There were two genders. There was a caste system that we were comfortable with. There's change in society, and I think what you're seeing with a lot of this is really just reaction to people's discomfort. And when you're the majority, when you have the power, you don't understand that enforcing your discomfort against other people, or requiring other people to comply so that you can be more comfortable, that's pretty coercive, and obviously it's not what we're about, or what we're supposed to be about in America. So I think all these issues really do tie together on kind of that macro level. But I think, to go back to your original point, I think fear really is the point, and there's a broad problem here with the from a legal point of view, the vagueness of a lot of these things, and the vagueness actually operates to create that fear.
Yeah, again, one of the other stipulations that they have in there is the making sure that you have all of not just the standard curriculum, but any other supplementary materials, which seems rather extensive in terms of what that could actually end up being. With this increased, I guess, workload for teachers and stuff, what does that look like for them? How are they doing already? How are they going to navigate these waters, with the funds that they have? Because we haven't heard anything about funding for, any of the implementation of this, reporting mechanisms and everything. But then again, just generally, I guess, kind of where are we sitting at this moment? I'll pass that over to Sarah, our resident Leandro expert.
No, well, I mean, I can jump in to explain why we're not talking about funding. And, I agree with Senator Grafstein. This is, just such a discouraging scapegoating of, some of our most vulnerable students. And Senator Mohammed, I agree, this is a distraction from, the real work at hand. And, kind of the best kept secret right now in education policy is that our state legislature, is in the hot seat. It's in the hot seat for complying with our most recent state Supreme Court ruling that we got in November in our state's longstanding equitable funding lawsuit, which is the Leandro court case. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone in the room, everyone listening, feels confident and comfortable in talking about what this thing is called Leandro, because it's been around for a while. Unfortunately, we've had 30 years to do the right thing by children in our state. And it's because every legislative session, right, we see this deflection and, these attacks and these manufactured crises rather than, lawmakers feeling obliged to actually uphold our most sacred oath, which is ensuring a sound basic education to every child. So Leandro's been around for a while. It was, everybody knows the way we fund our school systems are inherently unequal. Even in North Carolina, when we compel our state to commit, a sizable amount of funding for public schools, we rely on the wealth of our local communities by way of local property tax. So the way that we can fund public schools where I live in Durham County, for instance, is going to look different than, my counterparts and our families in Robeson County and Halifax County, among other rural or low wealth counties. And then within that, we know that some students have additional needs, right? It requires more funding to support our students with disabilities, our students who are learning English or who are from low wealth households or who are affected by racial discrimination, right? Like our students come to us with, with a whole identity and a whole set of needs and opportunities. And the state of North Carolina has been proven time and time again that they are not meeting the need to ensure every child that basic education. So it's really no surprise as advocates, and I just want to pause and, as a parent, it is just heartbreaking and it's infuriating that we even have to have this discussion. I watched as our partners at Equality NC and, numerous grassroots LGBTQ advocate partners, had to stop all of the good work that they were doing to support their children, support their students, and respond, to this, this nonsense, right? In November 2022, our state Supreme Court ruled for the third time that the state of North Carolina is not meeting our constitutional obligation to provide every child with sound basic education.
Can you repeat that again? How many times?
You would think the third time is a charm, right? And so the Leandro case started because families started organizing. Families who were affected by funding inequity said, our kids don't have the same opportunity for education that are their counterparts in other parts of the state, right? So that case was started in the mid-90s, and we were just back up at the state Supreme Court this summer, and then we got the ruling in November, and the ruling held what we've known and what advocates have been saying. The state of North Carolina is not doing its job in providing every child with sound basic education. We have a literal plan. That's the Leandro plan. I'll drop in the chat. The coalition that has been organizing around equitable school funding and using the Leandro plan, to engage with more advocates. We've recognized LGBTQ students are among our most vulnerable student groups, and our students, come to school as their full, beautiful selves. So, our students, have disabilities. Students are coming from low-income households. Students are coming from rural counties. Students are identifying as LGBTQ. They're all of these things, and rather than addressing what's needed to support their mental health needs, to ensure that they have a high-quality educator, to ensure that they have curriculum that is representative, that they can see themselves in, to ensure that they have, a school environment and a school climate that is affirming and safe. We have our state lawmakers focusing on all of the wrong things, present company not included. But it's really telling that, as we get closer to these incredible landmark civil rights victories, the backlash is so immediate and so predictable. So advocates went into this legislative session knowing exactly, the games that would be played, trying to pit members, against each other, and really try and do everything that they could to avoid doing the job at hand, which is funding public education for our children.
Absolutely. I mean, again, three times it's been affirmed that our state government is failing our students across the entire state. I'm gobsmacked by it, because whenever you say it's been going on for 30 years, I just turned 30 last year, so this has been an issue that has literally been drug out for decades. And just to clarify it, for people who may not understand, I guess, when we say the state at this point, can we get clarification, I guess, on where in the state this holdup is taking? Because I know we've got talks with treasurer, being told to get involved versus the NCGA versus superintendent of public instruction, like where does this person come into play versus like, Governor Cooper? Can we get, I guess, just kind of a general overview of where those people are plugged into the conversations?
Non-attorney here, so as an advocate and knowing that the General Assembly is who holds the purse strings, right? They are the body that is charged with funding public education. So while we've had this long-standing battle in the courts, and while there's certainly other actors that can influence the decision, ultimately it's a legislative solution that we're advocating for. And if there's a legislative solution, available today, if our legislative leaders would prioritize the education of children and take this obligation seriously.
Gotcha. So again, kind of putting that into perspective of we're already in kind of a 30-year hole to some degree. In terms of getting the funding and the resources, not only to the students, but to the infrastructure, all of those materials that they want teachers to, make public for parents and stuff, that typically seems to come out of the pocket of teachers instead of coming out of the pockets of, the state at that point. So when we're seeing these anti-trans bills and these anti-LGBTQ bills, one thing that really gets me, kind of tripped up on priorities is we're having legislators talk about getting rid of the National High School Sports Athletic Association and instead put it in with, I believe it's individuals who are nominated or appointed by the General Assembly to hold those positions. That is still in early talks at this point, but it is something that I know there are some Republican representatives trying to move the ball on that further. We also have that House Bill 43, which is targeting trans individuals, trans minors and students specifically from gender-affirming care on that end of things. Again, I think, Sarah, you said it great in terms of we're seeing this public backlash to equality and equity for other people. So diving into, Senate Bill 17 in terms of politicizing our Board of Education and our Superintendent of Public Instruction, could somebody maybe, I guess, kind of explain, while the idea of having elected representatives to that certainly sounds enticing, how does that accountability actually hold up? And is that really the best way to ensure that our students are being taken care of, student and educators are being taken care of, in the manner that they need to instead of a, specific election?
I have some strong feelings against gerrymandering our state school board. This is one of the last places that we have true bipartisan participation, and it's effective. This would put us in our own unique category. We would be the only state that would have this kind of partisan configuration that's really designed, to limit the power of the governor and to ensure that, certain voices representing, the majority of the students that our schools serve are not present while making education policy that will affect all of us. So it is just an absolute outrageous attempt at, just another consolidation of power, and again, distracting us from, the work at hand, the urgent work that lawmakers should be focused on.
Absolutely. And for those who aren't aware of, I guess, the structure of the Board of Education, our State Board of Education, the current Superintendent of Public Instruction chairs that at this point, and is on there with, I think it's like somewhere between 8 to 12 appointed individuals by the governor, as well as the lieutenant governor, who I know we all probably really love on this phone call, and all of the anti-LGBTQ rhetoric we see from him. I think it is very interesting how all of last year he was out there, kind of brandying and stoking up this division against LGBTQ people specifically. But then once we get into actual bill writing and everything else, like, where is Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson at this point? This was kind of his baby all throughout last year, and he hasn't really shown up, probably because he doesn't do well of sticking to the Republican talking points, and says the discriminatory parts out loud.
Tyler, if I may, real quick,
Uh-huh.
I know Sarah talked about Leandro, and I think it's important to also point out that we have a new Supreme Court now, or because a part of those elections, the Republicans have taken over. And the reason I bring this up is because this legislature has continued to overreach, and they've done it very savvily. So they've turned our judicial races partisan. That's how they were able to take a nonpartisan system and be able to flip our courts. Before, judges were elected in a nonpartisan fashion based on their merits and their skills as legal practitioners. But they saw that this way they were able to take over the courts. And this is precisely what they're doing with this constitutional amendment when it comes to the Board of Education. But this time they're not placing judges, so they look at gerrymandering, just like they do the North Carolina General Assembly, like Sarah brought up. So how do we take over the Board of Education? How do we usurp power from the governor? And you do it by gerrymandered state board of election seats. So it's a concentrated pattern and practice of the party that talks about limited government continuing to overreach. It's purely hypocritical.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for pointing that out, Senator Mohammed. I get so involved in that looking at our state Supreme Court transforming. Yes, they did rule in our favor, as Sarah mentioned, back in November. But we lost 6 out of 6 of our statewide races for judicial, nominations across the state.
Which, Tyler, now will affect that Leandro decision. I'm sure Sarah can talk about how now the change. Again, elections have consequences. It's having a consequences where they're having a field day where they're bringing back veto overrides in the North Carolina General Assembly because they have supermajorities in the state Senate, 1 vote shy in the state House. You're seeing what's happening in the state Supreme Court. They're having do-overs there. So they're really making a drastic change of our state government. And folks really need to pay attention to their state legislative races, and especially to these judicial races, and so much more in the next couple of years.
Senator Mohammed, could you possibly just briefly touch on those 2 cases that they've recently overruled?
So I'll let Sarah talk more. I know she's been paying more attention to it. She is the resident expert on Leandro. So Sarah, do you want to speak about that and how the change? I know a new judge has been appointed by Justice Newby.
Handpicked, right.
Exactly.
The second trial court, he handpicked. So the ink is not yet dry on our November 22 historic ruling win for children. That directed the state, it just affirmed, again, that the state is not providing every child with a sound basic education. And moreover, it compelled the state to release the funding necessary to fund, the Leandro plan, which again is that comprehensive 8-year-long infusion of almost $6 billion. It's policy, it's funding, it's across every single aspect of how we approach public education, with the goal of bringing every child up to meeting that constitutional standard, right? So that we don't have highly resourced schools and certain kids that are in a privileged position over here, and the vast majority of us are in underfunded schools. So this was a historic ruling. It was a celebratory victory for children's advocates, for people who have been pushing on Leandro for, again, decades at this point. And because the promise of equitable funding and us realizing our true potential as North Carolinians and educating every child was so threatening that the opponents of Leandro, immediately sought to dismantle that win. And, I'm not an attorney, but the attorneys among us have said, unprecedented is not even the word to use. This is just not how, not how we do policy. This is not how, the rule of law should be working in North Carolina. But Senator Berger, Speaker Moore, along with our newly appointed state controller, filed motions to essentially rehear that ruling and bring it back up to the state Supreme Court and basically start the whole process all over. And again, our opponents of Leandro have been very effective now for nearly 3 decades, delaying, stalling, and just hoping that advocates tune out. And it's thanks to leaders at NAACP, at the Justice Center, at all of our incredible grassroots partners, folks in Robeson, Cumberland, Hoke, and Halifax County, pushing on this because they know that their schools are on life support. If it's not for Leandro, they are not going to be able to deliver public education as we know it to their students. So this is what's at stake right now with North Carolina. I dropped in the chat, we have an active action alert that let them hear from you. We might not be able to to move them on this, but we have to let them know that we're watching, that we're engaged, and that we're going to keep fighting for our kids.
Yeah, and if I can kind of add on to that, Tyler, I know we've got a lot of questions, but I think it's really important to also reflect back on the other 2 cases that were reheard or that are being reheard, because one of them is the gerrymandering case, and the other one is the voter ID case, right? So you kind of have this trifecta. And what all these things, the whole, I guess, to sum up kind of what's going on is that there's a real, ingathering of all the power to the legislature, right? Because what we're going to, what the issue is in the Supreme Court case around gerrymandering, for example, a lot of that has to do with who has the right to decide, right? It's not even just you are right or you are wrong. It's who has the power. And the legislature's position, the legislative leadership's position is we have all the power. And if we don't have it, we're going to go get it. And that's what they're doing with the governor's power. That's what they're doing with the courts, because, the other piece going on with the courts is that they're trying to now shrink the ability of the Court of Appeals. They're trying to shrink the kind of cases at the Supreme Court. It's a whole set of things, all of which has to do with the separation of powers, right? We have 3 branches of government. What's really happening right now is all the power is being sucked into the General Assembly. And it's very self-centered of me to say this, and I don't know if Senator Mohammed's probably more gracious about it, but it means that the General Assembly is going to be all that matters ultimately, because if these races, if we continue to be in the minority, then the powers that have been controlled, the powers of all the processes, they're going to keep Republicans in power for longer periods of time. All this ties into education, not just because of all the decisions that relate to education, but because education is fundamentally the way in which we have sort of equality and democracy in our society, right? So to the extent that we're not really investing in education, that there is not equality in education. By the way, Robert Leandro is now a middle-aged lawyer, right? This has been going on a while. I was in law school when Leandro came out the first time. So these fights are going to end up being about who controls the General Assembly. And so that means we're going to have to be putting a lot of fight into those races in the coming years, and it's not going to be a short-term fix. I'm sorry to say, but I don't see another way, because we cannot change the way the systems have been broken with the other pieces of broken system. We can't fix the courts through the courts, because the Republicans have placed a bet on the idea that they're just going to keep winning those races, and it maybe at some point that turns around, but that's not. That's not a foreseeable kind of thing in the near future. And the same thing is true with the governor's powers. Once they get pulled away, it's much harder to get them back.
Absolutely. Again, I think the Senator Mohammed touched on earlier as well. This has been a planned thing. Again, it started with the court system, making them partisan. They've now taken over that. They are, as Senator Grafstein just said, limiting the power of the appeals in order to actually even get to the state Supreme Court to have a case heard. The state Supreme Court is currently held by, somewhat partisan actors at this point, it would seem. I know that I'll go ahead.
I meant to end my comments on a positive note, and here it is. Sarah, putting the link in the chat about advocacy, that's really, it really is all power from the people, right? That's really ultimately what it comes down to. And I think that's kind of the struggle that we're in here for the long haul. So that advocacy is super frustrating, but we have to keep doing it.
Absolutely. Well, and I wanted to kind of use that, I said this was an education, town hall. You didn't realize I'm in an education on how to be active and involved with, fighting all of this crazy nonsense that's going on. But again, we've seen a very methodical line of attack from Republicans that, again, not just here in North Carolina, but across the entire country. They have slowly moved into the government retail space, and are now, as I believe one of you mentioned earlier, kind of operating as a big government party, which goes totally against what their core values are supposedly. I again will always kind of have a general uncomfortability with the Senate leader, having a son on the state Supreme Court. That to me just feels a bit odd. But moving on to, I guess, some of those other, Senator Mohammed, do you have something to say real quick, or?
No, I was just going to say I agree with Senator Grafstein and you, Tyler, as well. The North Carolina General Assembly, Washington, D.C., they're very political places, but there shouldn't be a place for politics when it comes to the rule of law, and it certainly shouldn't be for education. And sadly, that's what we've become. So folks really need to pay attention to the North Carolina General Assembly races, even the congressional races. I'm going to have my third Senate district now, since I've been in the North Carolina Senate into my third term. This district has changed time and time again. Senator Grafstein, good luck to your district. Most certainly will change again. It has for me, and I'm not expecting it to change for our fourth time as the North Carolina General Assembly, because the Supreme Court has already ordered that rehearing, like Senator Grafstein has talked about, for the North Carolina General Assembly. So folks really, really need to pay attention. I know those presidential races are exciting. We're coming around to 2024. Folks get much more motivated. Democrats get much more motivated and excited every 4 years about who's in Washington, D.C. But there's a saying that all politics is local. And the North Carolina General Assembly has a tremendous amount of impact on your day-to-day life, much more compared to who's in Washington, D.C. and who's sitting in the White House. So folks need to pay attention, because this is going to continue to affect our court systems in our state. It's going to affect our public education. It's going to affect our health and well-being of our children. So this is where we're at. So hopefully collectively together, we can continue to move forward. So that's all I have to say, Tyler, about that. Thank you.
Absolutely. And again, it's I saw an article discussing how it's kind of a attack on critical thinking. And it's not just something we're seeing here in the United States. There are some countries in the eastern side of Europe who are also kind of taking this line of attacking critical thinking and education infrastructure in itself. Because I'm sure all of you at some point have mentioned it. Education is so fundamental to democratic principles and being self-sustaining as an individual. So what are some of these other potential bills we need to be on the lookout for? I know that we've got Medicaid expansion possibly happening, finally, eventually. It doesn't quite compare to the drag-out race that Leandro's had, but that certainly has taken its time going through the General Assembly. We've got medical cannabis. We've got some pistol permits, which, again, I've mentioned earlier as being potentially concerning. Some tenant rights as well. So feel free to hop in on any of those bills there.
So real quick, Tyler, I'll say, well, thankfully it hasn't been all doom and gloom at the North Carolina General Assembly. So one of the biggest and most important pieces of legislation is Medicaid expansion. We've been trying for the last 12 years to expand Medicaid, which would expand access to over 500,000 North Carolinians. Many of you know that we have almost 1 million people that are uninsured. There are people about to roll off of access to Medicaid because of some of the federal funding and resources ending. So this is an amazing opportunity. There's finally bipartisan support for it. The North Carolina Senate voted to expand Medicaid last session with a couple other pieces on it. It wasn't a clean bill. The North Carolina House finally did send over a clean Medicaid expansion bill. Looks like both chambers are going to come together, and there'll be some sort of conference committee to figure out what other bells and whistles that Republican lawmakers Phil Berger and Speaker Moore want. Medical marijuana, another huge positive direction. It's not the best bill. It's not perfect the way we would like it, but I think it is in a positive direction, because it does help some folks with some debilitating conditions. But again, back to veto overrides. Back to the doom and gloom, unfortunately, my friends that are listening over there, because we have had the hotel issues, hotel safety bill. Governor Cooper vetoed that during the pandemic. For over 30 years, North Carolina has provided landlord-tenant protections to individuals who live in hotels, motels, and inns, because it's their primary place of residence. You might live in a 5, 6, 7, 8 bedroom house. Someone might live in a 2-bedroom apartment. But for too many North Carolinians, their home is that one hotel room with one bed that is their refuge for their family with their small children. And there's a lot of consumer protections issues that if you're complaining about lack of reasonable accommodations, essentially the hotel operator could kick you to the curb. And we already have an affordable housing crisis in North Carolina. So this is yet another bill that the North Carolina Senate rushed through politically. It's in the North Carolina House. I'm hoping my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will have a little bit more compassion, because we offered amendments to protect our folks struggling with domestic violence protective orders, our veterans and seniors who need a permanent address to receive government benefits by policy and government rule of law. To protect our most vulnerable parents out there with small children. Time and time again, this General Assembly said no. They wanted to put special interests ahead. And back to gun violence. Just yesterday, the North Carolina House passed House Bill 50, pistol purchase permit repeal. The Senate did last week, Senate Bill 41. Essentially, we have had a comprehensive system in North Carolina that works right now, where sheriffs go through our court system. They go through the federal NICS system to provide background checks. It's much more comprehensive, I believe, when an individual is trying to purchase a handgun. The reality is this General Assembly, in the rise of mass shootings every day, I think we're at number 83 already in 2023 mass shootings as of this morning. Sadly, in North Carolina, you can't go to the movie theater, you can't go to the mall, the grocery store. Simple, basic things like running on a greenway anymore, and not worry about a mass shooting. And that's what we're dealing with. So this General Assembly said, we're going to remove background checks from the sheriff's office when it comes to, so in a massive wrong direction, where a majority of North Carolinians, Republicans, Democrats, independents are asking for gun safety legislation to help and protect not only my family, but your family. So this is going to be a massive loophole, especially for private sales. So if you want to sell your gun to an individual, now you would no longer be required to get a background check before you sell or transfer a handgun, which is absolutely dangerous and opens up too many people in North Carolina to further danger.
Absolutely. Just on a somewhat adjacent topic, going back to the voter ID and redistricting cases, one thing I just wanted to point out is, I don't know if anybody saw the Texas bill that they're trying to pass at the state level that is banning higher education, universities and colleges across the state from being a voting site. We've seen massive youth turnout across the entire country, specifically in a response to these acts of gun violence, to these acts of discrimination against, LGBTQ people, Black and brown people, the Jewish community, Asian and American Pacific Islander. We've seen all of these attacks on individuals across the entire country with such a strong rebuke from millennials and Zoomer generations, as well as, a lot of individuals in that independent category, kind of switching over to a more safer, idea of what society should look like, on the gun front. Is there anything else I guess you guys want to kind of make sure people are aware? Oh, actually, sorry, we did have one question. Let me make sure I've got that. What are some tips to get voters to pay attention to some of these down ballot races, such as judicial races? Well, I know if any of y'all have the answer to that, you're probably keeping it for that, $500 million check or something. So, feel free to, share it now if you have it, or, at least give it your best shot.
I just want to make sure we all leave tonight feeling encouraged and inspired. Right now, we don't have a legislature that represents the vast majority of, where we stand on our issues. I'm just going to share, this is not new, but, we had some polling come out last week. And I just want us to remember, where the vast majority of North Carolinians stand on our issues that matter most. 87% of North Carolinians support increasing teacher pay. 88% support investments in public school infrastructure. 90% of us believe that we need more investment in education and workforce training. 82% of us support increased investments in early childhood education. The issue is that our work is winnable, right? If we say, what we stand for, and we present the solutions that we are advocating for, North Carolinians will respond. Right now, we have, unfortunately, a legislature that is not aligned with where our values are as North Carolinians. But, we are able to turn that around. We can be talking to folks, we can share information, after this call of what we've learned. We can put people in touch with the different organizations leading on the issues. This is absolutely winnable.
And I know it's late, I'll just chime in to say amen to that. And also, I can't do it, and as great as he is, Senator Mohammed can't do it. It really is people power. And Sarah's absolutely right. When we run on the issues, when we have the issues that matter in front of people to their lives, most people don't walk around trying to hurt trans kids, right? When we're actually out there explaining to people the issues that are affecting them and why these things matter, but it takes everybody doing something. Because it's not something that's top down. We really need grassroots. I'm excited to see where the Democratic Party goes in the coming months and years with really kind of banging on doors and getting people out to vote.
Hey, Tyler, I have a simple tip about upcoming events. Because this is the LGBTQ Democrats, so sounds like you're a Democrat if you're listening in and you're tuned in. If you're not, we'd love for you to change your affiliation and join the Democratic Party. But there are precinct meetings going on for the next couple of weeks across our state. This is the opportunity because change happens block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood, city by city, state by state, right? This is how we bring about change. So across North Carolina right now, you can go to your local Democratic Party's website, county party, and figure out when your precinct meeting is. That's how basic political can be so local. Get involved, knock on your neighbors' doors, people that haven't voted in quite some time. Your local Democratic Party will have lists of people that you can call and turn out the vote, because we're definitely going to need you in the next couple of weeks to turn out the vote. We have a critical gubernatorial race coming up. There's going to be legislative races, congressional races that are going to impact you directly, school board races across many places across the state. The legislature is also working on local school board races and trying to turn them into nonpartisan races now, magically, or partisan races, vice versa. Whatever ends up favoring, they're doing it county by county. It's that same concentrated overreach. There's no such thing. I no longer believe that they believe in limited government at all, because they're doing whatever works best for them. And we have an opportunity over the next couple of weeks. You do. I know I have precinct meetings in my Senate district just this weekend. So I'm glad that we're having this meeting today. So go to your county Democratic Party, meet your fellow neighbors that live in your precinct, and figure out where you fit in. And if you don't have a precinct, you can have the county party chair appoint you to be the precinct chair, and you can be the person that's leading change in your local precinct. That's the most basic and simple thing we can do to change our state for the better.
Absolutely. I actually was just working on precinct organizing stuff for my precinct here locally today. I'll be sending out a few letters to the top 30 get out the vote individuals, in my precinct to try and again, if you don't know, precinct organizing is just 5 people within your voting precinct. If we're able to reach out and get 5 to 10 new voters who have not voted before in every single precinct that we've organized, we'll start seeing the change. I promise that. There's a few things that I can promise, but that is something that I feel so confident on giving a promise to, just because all of us, I think, have seen those numbers and know those margins, that if we do that local work, you don't necessarily have to go, traveling all across the state. You don't have to go to all the big fundraisers and stuff. If you just want to keep it local, plug into events like this to get general updates about what's happening either at the county, state, or federal level. That gives you the tools and resources you need to go and have those conversations with those voters. So again, use the information you've learned. Feel free to reach out. I'm sure any of these individuals will be more than happy to follow up with any questions you've got if you reach out to their office, or to reach out to them directly. I've got their information down below for you to check that out. But again, just wanted to thank each of you very much. Senator Mujtaba Mohammed from Mecklenburg, Senator Lisa Grafstein from over in Wake, and then Sarah Montgomery, policy advocate over at NC Justice Center for Education. So again, thank you all so much. If you have any questions about LGBTQ Democrats, visit our website at lgbtqdemocrats.org. Reach out to me or any of these individuals here. Thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week.